Now, Jasleen and I will get into some of the elements of today's today's sessions, and we are calling that 1Oankar and Nam. Jasleen, Kaur?
Thank you. So we're going to get started with the foundational principles that this session is named after. So we'll talk about 1Oankar and we'll talk about Nam, because we'll see that throughout Sidh Gosti, Guru Nanak Sahib takes it back to these foundational principles, even when the argument seems to be kind of caught up in different particularities. So he keeps bringing it back to these, and so let's understand them. So foundation, 1Oankar. So we've translated 1Oankar as one force. We know what ik means. We have a sense of what one is, one single unique thing, an unparalleled thing. There is nothing like that one thing. But Oankar gets a little bit trickier. So I'll start with kind of how we've explained it, and then we'll get into how Bhai Gurdas understands it and how Professor Puran Singh understands it, to just get a flavor of people's understanding who maybe know a little more than us, a lot more than us. So Oankar is the creative and pervasive force that is all-encompassing, continuous, the source of everything. We might say the original consciousness. We know that 1Oankar, one force, is in everyone and everything. We know that 1Oankar cannot be seen, but can be felt, and is a potential that all of us have access to at all times. So this isn't a thing where you have to work up to a particular level to have access to that. And when we feel 1Oankar, when we feel one force, that's when we create oneness. So oneness is not just kind of like a dead sort of abstract understanding of like everything is one. It's an active, creative thing, and it's a thing that we feel. And so I want to get in a little bit to what Bhai Gurdas says. So he takes these three elements of 1Oankar and he talks about how it's like made up of these three elements. So we have these understandings of a formlessness, a transcendence. So that's Nirankar, to be taking form into we call it like the one light, 1Oankar. And then Shabad melody comes from 1Oankar, the one form, to create the force form. So 1Oankar is this creative, pervasive force. It's active in the world. And I think we'll probably say the word active like 100 times today, because that's really important. It's really important to how we understand Nam as well. It's not this kind of separate thing that is overseeing us. It is a thing that is very much active in the world, acting in the world. And that's why we use the word force. And then Puran Singh also has a lot to say about this. So this is an adaptation from his writings on Sidh Gosti. So I'll just read this out loud. The live word, the name of 1Oankar, one without a second, whose written symbol is Oankar, Om in form, the word in flesh, the one unique human being who becomes the vehicle of 1Oankar on earth. The spirit of 1Oankar descends on the disciple through the favor of the Guru, the word in flesh. 1Oankar comes into human being. Said Guru Nanak, I salute the spirit of life, the being of truth that transcends all speech and thought. Simple. Everybody understands it? So I'm going to get into this a little bit more, because we're going to talk about Mulmantar and how we understand 1Oankar as this creative, pervasive force, and how that then translates to how we act in the world. And we'll have time for questions. But the thing that I really, really want to stress is this active element. So we'll get into Mulmantar. So this is the Sikh paradigm. So we start with 1Oankar, we start with one force, and then we have translated Mulmantar on the left, and then taken that into how do we then apply those things to our lives. And so, okay, we know that 1Oankar is identified by truth. So how do we cultivate that in our own lives? We know that 1Oankar is the pervasive creator. So what does that mean for us? So if you take a look at the left, I'll read the right, because I think we know Mulmantar, but I'm more interested in how we're applying that, because I think we tend to do kind of the abstract thing and then say like, okay, I kind of understand this in principle, but not in practice. So how do we evolve like the one, recognize the eternal principles, cultivate creative action, display fearless behavior? All of this is hard. And I think that's part of what we're going to come back to a lot in our discussions today, that none of this is like so easy. We can't really like flip a switch and become fearless and view no enemy. These are things we have to work towards. And it's about coming back to these principles and kind of rerouting ourselves in them again and again. Rising above consequences, cultivating the original self, and perceiving the grace, which is the kind of, we say it's kind of like the vehicle through which one can understand 1Oankar, is through that grace, which is accessible to all of us. So again, we think that maybe we have to do a bunch of things before we are graced, but it's actually just a matter of when you feel it. So it's always there, but when are you feeling it? Okay, so I know that was overwhelming and we'll have time for questions, but I'm going to go through Nam as well, and hopefully you'll start to like connect some dots between the different foundational principles. These slides have a lot of text, so just bear with me and I'll try to kind of explain them as we go along. So Wouldn't Sing again. It talks about Nam and Simran, which are words we've all heard before, hopefully. Maybe not. So we know that Simran, some people translate that as remembrance. And he talks about these two elements as they existed before Guru Nanak Sahib. So these were not new words that Guru Nanak Sahib brought to us. So what was Nam before? These words, Nam and Simran, are the cornerstone of the gospel of the Bhaktas of medieval India. If the words mean exactly what they mean to them, then Sikhism in this respect would turn out to be nothing but a kind of mystic reverie, which in its ecstasy seeks absorption into the infinite, as a piece that shuts itself up and shrivels up, evidently in all ordinary practice, to a mere dead concept of all is one. It would mean a modification of the doctrines of yoga, which are condemned by all the gurus with great vehemence. The Nam mutterers roam by the thousand in yellow robes on the banks of the Jamna and the Ganga even now to no purpose. Such peace ceases to be creative, creativeness being the only critical test which differentiates living peace from dead peace. The gurus did not mean by Nam and Simran what these would signify in Brahmanism, void with 1,000 forms. It is living in a paradise of beauties that subsist in name and form by the name. So I always love the sass in this, but we'll not focus on that. We'll focus on the message. So the clear difference here is that Nam, as sort of the Bhakts understand it, or those who mutter and roam by the thousands, is that kind of escapism that we talk about a lot, where it's like there's a duality of like this world and where you would like to escape to get some kind of freedom, to get some kind of union. And it's not the same as the Nam that we practice, because the Nam that we practice is a creative thing, right? We're coming back to this word active and this word creative, right? 1Oankar is a creative force in the world, and to emulate that attribute, to emulate that quality, means to exist in the world and not be of the world, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But yeah, there's this creative thing that's happening here, and that wasn't the way that people understood Nam before the gurus used this word and kind of reshaped this principle and our understanding of this principle. So I think that's something that we tend to still think sometimes. We think that if we want to feel some kind of connection or practice some kind of Simran, then it has to be this kind of quiet muttering, or it has to be this kind of escapism. And what we find instead is that Nam is very much about being creative in the world and interacting with things in the world that connect us to identifying with 1Oankar. And that becomes a thing where you don't actually need to escape the world. There's actually just a shift in perspective that needs to happen when you're walking through all of the things that are part of being a human on earth. So yeah, and then he talks about the Guru's Nam. So here's the comparison. Nam is inspiration, not a mechanical sadhana or effort to be what one cannot be without inspiration. Yoga and its process may yield some strange accomplishment, but accomplishments, however extraordinary, do not belong to the essential beauty of the soul. Thus, the Guru's Nam is the supernaturally natural function of a poetical genius who, though in body, is at all times of day and night under the influence of the higher soul worlds of freedom. The dull academic unity of all things does not interest him. It matters little to a living man whether the ultimate reality is one or many. The man of Nam and Simran does not concern himself with metaphysical speculation. He thinks his brief life is cut still shorter by idle mental abstractions. This occasion of life is for learning the divine music of life. It means hard labor. It means some kind of artistic perfection. So you'll start to see like connections to Sidh Gosti and kind of the way that we've set up this session, because the arguments, as you'll find and as you read through the translation, the arguments that the Sidhs make are a lot of times rooted in that kind of abstraction and that philosophy and that kind of in the questions that kind of give one a headache because that's not really what it's about. And Guru Nanak Sahib keeps taking them back to that gently and sometimes not so gently, but he keeps taking them back to that. That these sort of hang-ups on, questions that are very sort of nitpicky or particular or abstract are not what is like worth spending our time with. Like we ought to be trying to get inspired, trying to feel that connection, and then letting that influence our behaviors. And so we see that in Sidh Gosti. And I think what we'll find when we get to our discussion about like these elements of the Sidhs that are within us that Harinder Singh mentioned before, we all do. I mean, I think it's really easy to read Sidh Gosti and be like, wow, those guys are nuts. Like I can't believe they're concerned with these questions, but we do that too in our own ways. And I think that's worth reflecting on as we kind of understand these foundational principles before we get into the specific bodies. Yeah, so I mean, the etymology of Nam, it has roots in Persian, Sanskrit, and Prakrit. There's a few possible meanings, and we'll get into like the two kind of in ways that Nam is invoked within Gurbani. But we know name as a possible meaning, fame, honor, repute, and then the divine name. So the sum of 1Oankar's attributes. So we don't know that name, which is why we just use Nam. We don't know it. But there are all these other attributes that we have created to sort of try to understand 1Oankar a bit better. And that we'll get into that in the next slide. And then beyond vices. So if we get to this question of how we identify the one versus the identity of the one, I think we'll start to understand the different ways in which Nam is used. So there is this essence, this like one divine name that is supreme above all the other names, and we don't know it. So we have these invocations of Nam and Gurbani that are like pointing to that essence. So it's eventually learned Nam is the essence of everything. Without Nam, the pain and the fear of death cause grief. So that's not a particular attribute that we can name, but we just know it's like kind of a placeholder for that identity of the one. And then we have the divine attributes and qualities that we kind of assign. So that's where we get the attributes of like the compassionate or, the one light for Hari or things like that. Those are names that we have given to the one in an attempt to better kind of understand 1Oankar, even if we can't get to that one name. So here we have the tongue utters your virtuous names, and then we've added the clarification as given by us because we've given you those names. But Satnam is your eternal name. You exist. Your identity was the first. So there's this, I want to use the word play, but there's this play of how we understand Nam. And so we can like acknowledge that there is Nam with this capital N that we cannot translate. And then there's also the names that we have assigned in our kind of ever ongoing attempt to understand. So yeah, to sort of sum up, and this is also like relevant to how we understand 1Oankar. Nam is active, dynamic, real, and authentic. It is the principle, the supporting and sustaining power of all beings, universes, texts, knowledges, and so on. And we'll see this in our like translations and as we go through the bodhis. So our Nam is not the Nam that rusts over the mind. It is not the Nam that helps us escape from the world. It is the Nam that actually helps us stay in the world and be inspired and sort of spread that inspiration. And so the last thing that I wanted to leave you guys with before we get into the first breakout session is that we're all working towards this culture of Nam. It is in us and around us. That's the hope, right? And so Puran Singh has this beautiful visual of what that is. And so he says, the Nam is the seed of a grain like love. The new person of the Guru is to sprout like a tree growing upward. The spirit-born person, unlike the ordinary religious, is tied not to any past, but with the whole future. Guru Nanak impregnates the seed of Nam within himself and scatters the seeds all over. The river takes it, the wind spreads it. This seed is the Khalsa, which may be seen in its glory. People gathering on the banks of the Ganga, I'll say the Ganga, the Mississippi, the Thames, and the Seine will be reborn in the spirit of the Guru. So again, this is an active thing. And we're kind of, if you can like visualize Nam as a thing that you were like inviting in, which we'll talk, there's like a line later that talks about inviting Shabad within. But if you can invite it within you and it sort of fills you up, if we want to talk about the bodies as vessels, then it comes out in your behavior and it affects the people around you. It's an active inspiration, and it's not just it's not an isolating thing. It's actually a thing that connects you to other people. Hi.
Hi, so we talked about, one interesting discussion point that came up was the meaning of the word phobia. Was it something about like aimlessly wandering, or were you wandering in purpose of something else? And so the translation that we ended up coming up with was, what do you search for? Vaheguru's truth can purify you. Without true wisdom, we cannot be free.
Can you actually repeat that? And I don't know if you all have video capabilities or if we've turned that off, but if you want to go on video, that'd be great too. But can you just repeat that translation for us?
Yeah, I put it in the chat as well, and I'm not allowed to turn on my camera. I think that privilege has been blocked. But it was, what do you search for? Vaheguru's truth can purify you. Without true wisdom, we cannot be free. And so our like broader application was, you really need Nam and Shabad to attain Mukti. And like, that's what we've been told. So there's no point looking for anything else.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for sharing. And I will ask Maneet to unmute.
So our group discussed that the first book was, why are you wondering if truth is going to be true and is true? Then we got into the second line and we started having a dialogue around what is Shabad. And we kind of came to consensus that it was an internal connection and the sense of like realizing self. And it's therefore, instead of wondering, this deep connection is what brings us into this truth-centricness that brings about this liberation. And so without this realizing, this internal feeling, there can be no liberation.
So did you discuss how you all understood like the word purity? Because I know that becomes, it can get something that we've become caught up on.
We did not get to discuss the sense of purity itself, but I think most of our discussion was centered around the Shabad itself, because we were discussing whether it is word, Gurbani, whether it is an internal self, whether it's a physical space in your brain, or whether it's a realm of consciousness. So I think that's really where our confusion lay.
Yeah, that's fair. I think that's a good confusion to have. And what, can you just actually remind us what room you're in? I forgot to ask people to do that. What breakout session you were in?
Oh, like number? I think we were number 3.
Okay, yes. I was supposed to ask you guys to do that. So for the rest of when you share, if you can tell us what breakout room session you were in, that would be great. Thank you, Vineet. Gurpreet Kaur, I'm gonna unmute you.
Hi. So we spoke about the word satya and the different meanings of it. So there was truth, there was eternal. Someone mentioned about devotion and union with the force. Something about Sachkhand and how the devotion to the truth is through the Sachkhand. But I have a question that I asked in the group, and I'd like to put it out here. If you look at the first part of the Rahau Pangti, it says, or literally it means, why would you wonder when the truth is eternal? But my question would be, if you don't wonder, then how would you then recognize that that is the truth? Because then you will be in the truth and you won't realize that, hey, I am actually in the truth. And so wouldn't wondering then help you realize that that is the truth, and then you make a conscious effort and a choice that you want the truth to be part of your life?
It's an interesting question. I think that's probably rooted in how we understand the word wander, especially in this context. So I think like when we talk about our journeys and kind of like the questions that we might ask or the wandering that we might do. I mean, somebody had asked earlier why we use so much Puransing. It's, because it's not just because he's one of the only like English sort of sources who gets into explanations like this. But if you ask me, part of what really speaks to me about Buddha Singh's journey is that he tried a lot of different things out, and he was exposed to a lot of different theologies and understandings. And I don't think that that's bad. So I think I understand your question. I think the wandering we're talking about is a sort of aimlessness, or maybe a lack of feeling sort of settled and sort of satiated in our journeys. I think it's a lot more about this idea that we're like looking outward and externally for some kind of connection and it's this theme, right, that comes up in Gurbani all the time, when the one is within you. You don't have to go looking. And if you looked at the resources we had under the worksheet on the second page, when we were doing the transcreation, we were a little bit more specific about that wandering, and it became about, going to the jungle or doing certain exercises, right? Because think about the context of this Bani. The Guru's talking to people who are doing all these kind of extreme things, looking for some kind of connection. And the sort of thesis is that that's not necessary, because that connection can be found within if we root ourselves in these principles that we talked about earlier. So yeah, I understand your question, but I think it's about the difference in context of how we understand the word wandering. So in this context, it is very much about kind of like a physical wandering, and also a sort of lack of looking inward for that connection. I don't know if Harinder Singh, if you want to add anything to that.
No, I think that's great. The context does matter. So kya pavya here is the wandering to the looking for sacred spaces, because people have created them in the world. And it's in that context, it's saying, look, don't look for those, the purification, because people are looking to become pure. That's what's been sold. So what Guru Sahib is saying, well, if you're really looking for that quote unquote unblemishedness, immaculateness, that purification, it's going to happen when you actually discover the eternal, the force, like 1Oankar. So it's a physical context, because even the yogis do that. They have particular matas, which means the mutts, which means the centers where they would gather, and by going to particular gatherings and particular discussions and particular yoga sutra mudras, which are postures, they thought this was their way to get to their goal and become even more purified. So the very much context is physical. It's very much about some sort of a cleansing to become pure, where Guru Sahib is saying it really is about becoming like the 1Oankar, becoming that eternal idea, which is not based on time and space, including geographical space.
Thank you. Hargobind Singh, I'm going to have you unmute. And if you could just share what breakout session you were in, if you remember, that would be great.
Hanji, we were in breakout session 2, I believe. And before we went to the Rahau Pankti, we very quickly went over the verses before that to sort of just understand the setting of the stage for this conversation, this dialogue that's about to take place, because there's a very clear measuring that the Siddhs take on, where they're expecting Guru Nanak Dev Ji to basically salutate them. And Guru Nanak Dev Ji's in response to that is sort of like, the line that you drew, I'm going to redraw it. You know, it's almost like dictating the terms of battle before you sit down and have that debate. So then as you move on to the Rahau Pankti, there's a bit more clarity there, because the portion where Guru Sahib basically says, sorry, I'm just lost myself. 1 second.
No worries.
There we go. So once Guru Sahib goes into the Pankti with the Rahau Pankti is basically kya paviya sacha sucha hoye sacha sabad bina muktana koi. And one of our fellow members in the group was very taken by Guru Sahib's usage of both the words sacha and sucha in the same sentence, almost creating a distinction between the two. And as we look at some of the different translations, the clarity is there in the sense that, you know, to basically, you know, the only way to attain purity or sucha or suksham is through the truth, you know. So that was pretty amazing for us to sort of come to terms with. The question in regards to wandering was there as well, on whether was this a physical wander, whether this was to be searching for truth, but just within oneself. But I believe that has already been addressed in the previous question. And I think the last line was pretty clear for all of us. Sacha Sabad bina mukta na koi. The reference to the importance of Shabad here, basically the true word of the Shabad. So the Shabad being the Gur Prasad through which you achieve mukti and emancipation. I hope I got the interpretation of my group right in this delivery. So yeah, that was it. Thanks.
Great. Thank you for sharing. We'll go with Gadandeep Singh. And if you can just say what room you were in and share, that would be great.
I don't remember the room number. I'm sorry.
That's fine.
I wasn't paying attention. In my group, I had Alvin, Sagar, I believe, and Safalji. We did focus on the word paviye. We discussed if it actually means wandering around physically or wandering around mentally. But there's one confusion. If we look at a history of Guru Amar Das Ji, he was wandering all his life until he heard Guru Shabad, and then he found the Sach. How do we? The way I see it is like I'm you know, at this camp today because, you know, I'm also paviya. I'm also wandering around trying to search for the same truth like everybody else. Is it bad to wander around trying to search for truth? And then the second thing I have a question about is the word Shabad in the second part. Is Shabad different than Nam? So what's the difference between Shabad and Nam?
Okay, great. So I think we did talk about the question of wandering. So here it's very much the connotation is very much that it's a physical wandering. And I mean, Guru Nanak Sahib's not even saying wandering is bad. There's a question being posed, and there's an ask to be a little bit introspective about what it is we are searching for, especially when we're going on these like physical sort of expeditions in search of some kind of cleansing. So that's the context here. And then Harinder saying, if you want to answer that second question, I know we have a slide later on, but the relationship between Shabad and Nam, and then we can move on.
Yeah, I think this is a good way to pivot into the discussion on Shabad, because obviously if the word is invoked, there is something else going on. The word Shabad is invoked very clearly. The context of this line, and without getting into the Shabad itself, is essentially saying, look, people have their own ideas of what mukti is, what emancipation is, liberation is, what I just like to simplify freedom is. And for those freedoms, people are running around to seek those freedoms. And classically religious world, they were seeking at particular religious centers, or as they call them, sacred spaces. And they thought they will somehow wash their sins and become purified. So it is in that context being said, something like Shabbat is needed for freedom. And when you are connected to eternal ideas, that's when your wandering will stop. It is not judgmental about people who are wandering. We are all wandering all the time. So if we can go to the next slide, actually, and we'll get into the Shabbat's discussion. What is this connection of 1Oankar, Nam, and Shabbat? And if you saw very intentionally, we did not even talk about what the Shabbat until now, because Shabbat is invoked in Rahau. And after Rahau, we are going directly to Pauri 58, because we want to stay in the context. We're going to talk about full Pauri 58, 59, and 60, where the Shabbat is invoked. So these are our simplistic understandings of the Pauri. And look at the question. Remember, these are Siddhs, and not any Siddhs. The leader of the Siddhs is asking these questions. So the level of conversation, we have to raise the bar a little bit. It's like us watching, particular debates, whether they're presidential debates, or if you're at the universities, there are different styles of debates which are happening on positionings. So this is a debate on the positioning as happening of the Siddhas with Guru Nanak. And here is where he says, because Guru Nanak invoked the word Shabad. So he's like, where do you share this Shabad lives? That will be our question too. What is this Shabad? Which you are claiming will allow us to swim across the world ocean, which is what freedom is, which is what mukti is. And he then, according to his own system, he says, it is said that when exhaling, the breath can be felt up to 10 fingers. Tell us, what is its support? Because they always want to know what is supporting what. So in the yogic tradition, they believe the exhalation and inhalation processes, they have their own systems on it. Some believe it takes whatever 10 fingers is what's written here, but you listen to different yoga sutras, some will say 14, some will say 10, 12 even. What this is saying is according to the yoga, certain yoga schools, how long it takes, the number of lengths of the finger is the length of time it takes to exhale fully. So he's saying, well, whatever that might be technically, what is supporting even that breath? Then how can the being, referring to us as people who speaks, so they're actually putting down commoners. So they're basically saying, the Siddhs are saying, people who are constantly talking and playing, how can they figure out the one who is steady, and how can they become steady themselves and know the unknowable? Which means average person is not capable of it because they're too busy playing. So they're very loaded questions here. So these are not just a personal question. These are ideological questions is what we will call it today. So let's talk about the word Shabad. Look, Shabad, or the Sabda as the word is, today we call it Shabad, but it's actually Sabad. It has three etymological meanings. It can mean word, literally the word itself. It also means the sound, and it also, the word meaning is part of the meaning of it as well. So those are the literal meaning, but the generally understood view is the Shabad refers to whether it is being spoken, whether it's being understood, whether it is written, whether it is being voiced, what is the wisdom coming out of it? And I like to use the word infinite wisdom because it's a capital S Shabad in that sense. So this is how Guru Nanak now responds. And he says, he actually calls him Swami Yogi. The word Swami he uses, which means the master yogi. He says, listen, O master yogi, let me tell you what I think about all this. Because all you need is your mind to understand, not the yoga itself, not this 10-finger business. What does the mind need to understand this? He says, the wisdom-oriented connects with the eternal Shabad. This is very important to understand because the exact line is, Gurmukh Sabad Sach live lage. Now, the words are important because Gurmukh is Guru-orientedness. Gurmukh is a process on how do you become Guru-oriented, and he's invoking the process there. He says, as you bring wisdom into your life, this is how you get connected to the eternal Shabad. And this is how you realize the 1Oankar and the grace of 1Oankar. And you yourself are getting united. You don't need any interceptor doing this to you. And then he says, Vaheguru or 1Oankar, knows everything. Appe. Appe is a self-reflexive pronoun there, which is used quite a bit in Gurbani, which means it's hard to translate. Some people will write you for it, some will write God for it. We're trying to stay as close as possible to the original word. So the one self knows, Appe. One self watches, which means what you know, what I know is less important. What people also might not know is less important. What the 1Oankar is doing, that's what really matters, and that's what brings a fortune. And he continues with his answer. In Padi 59, if we can go to the next slide, this is where he's now describing how the Nam and Shabad comes together. So the Shabad lives incessantly everywhere. They asked him, where does it live? What's the support for it? It's everywhere. The wisdom is everywhere, right? Infinite wisdom is everywhere. Wherever you look, if you see the one, you're also seeing the Shabad. Shabad is how we are mentally understanding or how we are voicing certain things, how we are giving meaning to certain things. And just like the air lives everywhere, the 1Oankar, the actual emptiness, the sun. So this is a play on the yogis, because yogis believe only they can get to the nothingness or the emptiness. He says, no, emptiness of the absolute kind, referring to 1Oankar, is also everywhere. It is not just with you. You are working on a very small emptiness. Here, there's a larger emptying of the things happening in the universe. So one's existence is not based on any power. One is self-powered, which means Sabhang idea that we earlier talked about, that Sabhang is self-elimination, self-powered. And the grace is when the Shabad is living in our minds, when it enters the mind. So wisdom has entered the mind. There is no more delusion. There is no more dichotomy. And Nam lives everywhere. So Shabad lives in mind. You see this? That's the difference. So Shabad speaks to what again we voice, what we write, the texts we do, the explanations we have. You know, Nam is everywhere. Nam is in mind, mind is in body, and it makes mind and body filth-free. Even our voice, the way we know Nam has entered us, the way we articulate things, the way we speak also changes. Otherwise, we are filthy in our verbiage. We use all sorts of vocabularies. When the Nam is there, then there is no, even the voice is filth-free. And this is how you will cross the world ocean. This is how the Shabad helps you realize all this right now while you're in the process of crossing. And 1Oankar has no feature, no color, no shade, no deception. And this is, you will discover that when you have recognized the Shabad. So the whole answer in Padi 59 to the question, 3 questions raised earlier about what is Shabad, how does Shabad affect you, where does Shabad live, and its connection to the Nam is being introduced. So Shabad really, as we understand from this Padi, is about grasping that infinite wisdom. So your mental, your philosophical, your intellectual, your logical curiosities are being answered. And when you bring that out in practice, only not as the mind is clear, your tongue is clear, your life is clear, which Guru Nanak Sahib is calling filth-free, which is basically Niranjan idea, which is also this idea of how we live in a form of filth I like to use because we all understand it. When we use certain abstract words, we think we don't have that filth. No, I very much have my own darkness. I very much have lots of filth in my mind, in the way I speak. So Nam is when the Shabad has been understood and practiced. If we go to the next part, which is the Padi 60, and he completes his answer, Guru Nanak Sahib, and he's saying this to the master yogi, so keep that in mind. He says, let me now invite Shabad to live in you, because you're actually only interested in the abstraction of nothingness or emptiness. But so look how he refers now, oh yogi. He actually calls him that. He says adhu. Adhu word which is used in this line is the word for yogi. He says, listen, oh yogi, the support for the breath that is felt according to your measurement of 10 fingers is also the one absolute emptiness eternal. Now that's our way of presenting. Exactly, Guru Nanak Sahib has written, Tre Sat Ungal Vai Adhu Sun Sach Aharu. So such is eternal. Sun, we had to put out how to share with all of you, because we don't want you to think Guru Nanak is endorsing the shunya of particular yogic philosophy. He's like, everything is a support, that there's a larger emptiness, which is the larger universe Absolute emptiness exists there. And that's the support of even your shunya and also the breaths you are talking about. So whenever Guru-oriented speaks, then reflect on the essence, realize the ineffable, infinite. This is describing what is 1Oankar. These are the words the bodies we pick because it's showing you relationship. He says, when the Shabad has lived in your mind, that's when the Guru-orientedness happens, which is what wisdom is. Guru is wisdom for her, wisdom and perfection. This is when we'll actually understand what ineffable and infinite is. Otherwise, we have finite understandings, and we limit the infinite to those finite understandings. And this is when you will discard the ideas of three gunas. Because right now we are caught up in these three gunas of Hindu thoughts, because we are trying to understand this in their paradigm. He says you will leave that paradigm and you will enter the 1Oankar and Nam paradigm, and you will invite Shabad into your life, and the pride in your mind will end. So discarding of these Raj, Rajo, Tamo, and Sato, Rajasic, Tamasic, and Sattvic, if you're not aware of those three, it's not as important, it's okay. All it means is that our religious text, Gurbani, Guru Granth Sahib, and other texts utilize these words. We need to understand what this is. So this is their philosophy. It says you have to discard that thought, this division of everything, what is pure and what is not allowed, and what is action-oriented and what is considered the pure food even, because that's what they had done based on these three gunas. He says when you get rid of that divisions, and when you bring wisdom in your mind, the pride of the mind will also end. This is when you will recognize 1Oankar everywhere, within you and outside every place you are seeing. And this is when the love for the Nam will enter. So Nam, love is developed. Mind needs certain satisfaction, certain curiosities, right? You might have certain good impressions, but if you want to stay addicted to that desired form, then this is where the love for the Nam comes in. And when the Nam comes in, look, then he says to Yogi again, and the Yogi within us is being challenged. Oh, Yogi, you say if one figures out Ida, Pingala, and Sukhmana, these are the yogic mudras. If you know about yoga, they are working very much to utilize these three elements to control breath through three channels. He says, you say that if you figure out these breath controls through these channels, you will know the unknowable. But he says, Nanak doesn't say that. I don't prescribe to that because I believe the eternal, the such is beyond these three yogic channels. So in order to become like the one, in order to know the unknowable, you actually need to bring the Shabad, the Guru Shabad in your life. So this is a very emphatic, very direct response, totally following what they are talking about and telling them how they are actually not understanding the idea of 1Oankar, the idea of one. Even their idea of Shabad is very limited to only one particular Yoga Sutra philosophy, and they definitely have not even entered the realm of Nam, which is all about becoming filth-free at all levels, not just a particular religious cleansing.
Thank you. So I'm just going to follow up with three more 40s. So these first two, so 40s 32 and 33, are looking at what happens once one is drenched in Nam, like what are the effects of that? And I'll relate it a little bit to some of the questions that we have at the end, but I don't want to give you all too many ideas. I want you to tell us what you think. But so the first line is, by drenching in Nam, ego diminishes, and then it continues in this 40 in the next. So drenched in Nam, they remain like the eternal. Drenched in Nam, they reflect on the method for connection. Drenched in Nam, they enter the gateway to freedom. Drenched in Nam, they gain insights on the three regions. And Nanak, drenched in Nam, they always remain in the state of joy. So this first 40, and it continues later, but I wanted to talk a little bit about just like what it means for ego to go away. I know that like we all have said that we're all wandering, but I think we can all also agree that we're all dealing with our ego at just all times, in all places, in all conversations. And so this ego diminishing is actually like directly, as I understand it, is directly related to what it means to be free, to the gateway to freedom, because it's when we're in our ego that things like, you know, there's so many lines in Gurbani that talk about like praise and slander. It's when we're able to kind of diminish that ego that those things don't affect us as much. And we had that earlier line asking about how to be steady in the world. And I think that a lot of times we feel like we have to detach ourselves fully. And that's where that idea of emptiness even kind of seeps into our own understanding of what it means to be steady in this world and lacking in ego in this world, or at least having a diminished ego in this world. And we think that it's all about kind of detachment and emptiness and moving away from being sort of in it. And so it's actually this thing where the opposite comes. So like drenching yourself in something is very different from emptying yourself, right? Like it's actually a thing that you are surrounding yourself in, and you're immersing yourself, and it's coming into you and it's changing you. Earlier we had talked about Nam as the chisel. This is all happening in the world and within us, and that like mukti is happening while we're here as human beings, alive and well on earth. And so what that means is that like that Nam, drenching ourselves in that Nam, actually changes the way that we react to things, because it has allowed us to sort of chisel away maybe at our egos. It allows us to continue to root ourselves in trying to become like 1Oankar, trying to root ourselves in that eternal. And that changes our behavior and our understanding of like maybe the discussions that we're having. And we'll talk about that a little bit later, because we're going to ask about applying this to our own conversations, especially when we disagree. And when we can kind of stop getting hung up on those more like abstract or philosophical things in our conversations, when we can feel that Nam has diminished our egos, we will be able to let go of things more easily. And that's what it means to kind of be free. We're like freeing ourselves from attachments of how we are perceived, what people say about us. And I think, yeah, I've just been thinking a lot about these things in my own kind of conversations, because it's easy. And I know I said this in the beginning, it's easy to like think about 1Oankar and Nam and like oneness as this abstract thing, especially when it doesn't involve difficult conversations or disagreements. But we're seeing that it is possible to have those difficult conversations and have patience and diminish our egos in those conversations when we have done the work of inculcating Shabbat, addressing the mind's questions, and then immersing ourselves in Nam and watching our behaviors change. So this is just sort of a taste of what that's like. I couldn't tell you. Maybe I have moments of it, but it's not all the time. And then this next part, it continues. So drenched in Nam, the Sidh Gosti occurs. Drenched in Nam, the asceticism always occurs. And then we wrote a little explanation. Nam is beyond the torments of yoga. Drenched in Nam, the eternal and essential deed occurs. Drenched in Nam, the reflection on virtue and knowledge occurs. Without Nam, all else voiced is useless. Nanak, I salute the ones drenched in Nam. So this I am very interested in, because it's actually that Sidh Gosti, like this actual conversation cannot happen until one is drenched in Nam. So these difficult conversations can't happen the way that we've seen them happen in this body until one is drenched in Nam. And I think that kind of, I don't know, that's just something that's stuck with me a lot as I've like existed as a millennial on the internet, and all these discussions are happening in front of my eyes all the time, that like, it's not until we've done that work that like our conversations can be sweet instead of hostile. And drenched in Nam, this line about all else voiced is useless. Like it's actually not worth, like, are we opening our mouths to speak before we have started to cultivate that Nam culture that we've talked about? And if we're doing that, then what use are our words? So this is getting more into the application, which I know we're going to ask you all to think a lot more about at the end. But these are just the things that I've taken away from these 240s. And have especially kind of focused on as I try to take what I might know or understand in the abstract into an application in my own life. Even as like conversations might be difficult or sometimes like hurtful. Yeah, and then so the last one is 4073. It's the last 40, and it just brings us back to that foundational principle of 1Oankar as the sovereign and unique force. So I'll read the whole thing. So, O one force, you alone know your state and measure. What can anyone say? You are self-hidden and self-manifest. You self-enjoy all color pleasures. Seekers, Siddhs, Gurus, and numerous disciples wander searching for the command. They ask for Nam. You give this alm. They are willing to sacrifice anything for your vision connection. Imperishable Divine created this game of Sidh Gosti and the world. Guru-oriented has this insight. Nanak, oneself pervades in all eras. There is none other who is forever eternal. So we like know that, we know that from our like discussions on Nam, that 1Oankar, there is this like, this element of not knowing that we all kind of have to become comfortable with when it comes to our relationship with 1Oankar. And so that's kind of stressed a little bit, but the line that I really am coming back to all the time is that 1Oankar created this game, and we've added this explanation of it's both this discussion that is part of this play, and it's also like the entire world. And so I want you all to think as we transition into the last, I think, 30 minutes as we close, and we'll have Jamboard discussion and larger discussion, to think about how to apply what is being said here to how you perceive conversations, how you perceive interactions with people where it's like more difficult maybe to remind yourself of that oneness, to feel that oneness. If we can approach every like disagreement with that understanding that even our conversations where we disagree are part of the play, which sounds like a crazy thing to say, but that's true, right? If we're going to say that everything is one, if we're going to say that and actually feel it, then that means that even those disagreements are giving us something of value, even if they're difficult. So I've come back to that quite a lot because I was just kind of struck by the statement that even the conversation itself is part of that larger play that we might not understand. But if we can kind of like zoom out and refocus ourselves, I think it changes the way that we interact quite a bit. So with that, I think Harinder saying, if you have anything to add, feel free, and then we can move into the Jamboards.
No, I think we can. If you just go to the next slide. So this visually, what you're essentially saying is that 1Oankar is everything, okay? Everything, things you like, things you don't like, things which we are able to comprehend, things we are not able to comprehend, things we can perceive and things we are struggling to perceive. Every space, physical, non-physical, material, non-material, everything is 1Oankar. And the closest feeling of that we can capture is when we are able to identify with the things which allow us to feel the 1Oankar is now. Because we are not able to feel everything. 1Oankar is infinite. Nam allows us to relate to those things. This is what drenching in Nam becomes so important. Otherwise, 1Oankar will remain an abstract. And that's what it was. If you looked even in the earlier explanation, it was explained in those abstract terms because that's what yogis were understanding, the Siddhs were understanding. Today we will say this is where we overly intellectualize everything. So when you have a realization of some of that, then we will be able, that's part of the Nam, where you're experiencing 1Oankar. In order to experience, identify with 1Oankar, which is Nam, we need some mental clarities. We need some food for thought, as we like to call it. We need not just wisdom, we need some larger wisdoms, which have been captured in various ways. Guru Granth Sahib is one which has been captured by the Gurus and the Bhagats, and Guru Arjan Sahib gave this gift to the humanity. So Sabad is that. It is an explanation of those, the words, the meanings, the voices, the sounds, which come together so we can experience 1Oankar through Nam. So we have an appreciation of becoming part of the idea of 1Oankar. So Shabad is a subset of Nam. Nam is the closest thing possible for us to experience and feel 1Oankar. one of my explanation, those of you know who you know the Sikh authors, I say, like Harinder Singh Mehboob was an author who dwelled on Shabbat. So he's answering things which are very complex in the complex frameworks. This is where the academic world is, the intellectual world is. And Nam is where you're experiencing it in addition to that intellect. This is where Professor Puran Singhs and Paiveer Singhs of the world come in. Shabad is Harinder Singh Mehboob and the Kapoor Singhs of the world, right? Nikki Gurinder Kaur is explaining the Shabad from a feminist angles today. So Nam is when we are experiencing all that. The explanations, voices, meanings are coming together to experience. And when you are experiencing and at the highest level of experience, you're relating to 1Oankar, the force of this world. This is how three of them come together as we understand it within Sidh Gosti as well. You might be wondering about today that we keep writing 1Oankar over and over. And the reason for that is because that's what Guru Nanak did. He was raising the bar to have something starts with Ik, the one. And because people had not, when they had invoked one, they did not start with that. They eventually said, well, it leads to that, right? So we are making an intentional effort to stick to Guru Nanak's vocabulary, and this is the English way of writing it. The numeral, we are keeping one. So, and as it is, even in this Bani, which we were discussing so far, my response is, I'm just going to share mine. The more Bani I read, and even preparing for this and listening this morning to Sidh Gosti by Jarnail Singh, the thought which kept popping into my mind is, I actually don't even have the parameters fully understood yet. How can I even have a conversation? It's like when you're observing something, we don't even know what the conversation is about many a time. So what I realized is I have a very impersonal 1Oankar so far. I do not even, I'm barely venturing into the personal 1Oankar. So it's still very abstract, and I would like it to become more like as today's Hukum had it, more like from Thakur to more like a Sai, where I can personalize it. Anyone who wants to share any insights to what they wrote or any reflection on 1Oankar? Please raise your hand. Well, while they're reflecting or classically meditating, since we are talking about Siddhas, Jasleen, you have any reflection?
Yeah, that sticky note on the top left really got me. I think I've said this maybe to just my family members before. I think there's I don't want to approach 1Oankar yet, so maybe I'll talk to the Guru instead. Or it's like this very far away sort of thing sometimes where I know that I can feel a connection sometimes, but I don't want to go there yet because it's still too abstract to me. And so that's where I'll maybe foster more of a relationship with Shabad or, with Guru, however you understand that. And so I think I had never kind of vocalized it that way. So that sticky note really got me. But there are moments, I think, and maybe we've all felt this, where that maybe sort of trepidation is not there. And those moments are kind of rare for me, at least, but they help me remember that that distance is all kind of my own brain creating something out of nothing. So yeah, it looks like we've got some people who are raising their hand.
You're unmuted, and after that, Manath.
Yes.
So I want to say about Nam, it seems like that is maybe confusing purposely, maybe sometimes, but the question was what is Nam to you? And I wrote super enjoyment, but I felt maybe it would be better to call it steady enjoyment or something like that.
Well, maybe within that last 3 minutes, it went from super to steady for you. So that is what Nam is active. Remember, it might be doing different things even momentarily. So yeah, that's thanks for sharing that. Mana?
Oh, I was actually going to just talk about the first one. Building on what you said, Jasleen, this was my sticky about it feeling abstract. And like, I definitely agree with you because at times it almost feels like even a little bit like silly of like, what is this idea? What am I really getting into just because of how all encompassing it is? But I often like to stick to like in Ardas, it says, Tegh Bahadur Simriya Karnaune Devetai. Like that feels so much more attainable to me. It makes so much more sense because I can look at the history, I can look at the Sakya and really use that to build my own connection. And then like even Bani Guru, Guru Hai Bani, like using that to connect with Vaheguru and just like hoping that Shabad can eventually get me to Nam, which can eventually get me to Vaheguru like you talked about.
Yeah, well, thanks for sharing that. And by the way, we can go back and forth between 1Oankar, Nam and Shabad as you feel, because look, it's not linear. That was just one explanation of a graph. It's constantly going back and forth between the three because things are feeding different elements. So please feel free and we will move the slides where need be. Gurpreet Singh, that is.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, I mean, an observation, and I haven't the space to download Jamboard on my phone, so my comment's been missing, but it's around the question actually, and just the kind of the relationship or the relative use of the word who is 1Oankar to you, and I think that distinction needs to be heard or teased out and nuanced, because the two other questions have the word what, and I think there's value in how we try to then personify or try to like when you're asking the word, who, in our understanding of just language and transliteration, these, that's what jumps out at me at times. And I wonder how, the answers would change if the other two questions had who, or if this question had said what. I'm not going to try to answer it. I just want, I think me as asking a lot of questions. But I think to me, the one that I do resonate with, or at least that I enjoy has got me thinking, is this idea of a support system, like an ecosystem, that if it's an energy that we're, that we're connected to that. And then that to me is that oneness.
Well,
I'll leave it at that.
Actually, even when Jasleen and I were working on this, we changed that intentionally to where it ended up today. We decided to intentionally make this one the who, the first one, and the next two were what, because you hit on that personification, and also how we visualize some of these things changes based on that. But that's fine. I mean, those are the kind of discoveries and understandings which we are working towards, and partly it's unfolding for ourselves, and partly it's sharing with others.
Yeah, it's certainly part of that uncertainty principle. Like, it is what it is at the time that you need it to be. Sometimes it will manifest, in a visual, an image, like where right now the Olympics are on. And so maybe we draw inspiration from, an athletic, heroic kind of achievement, especially when we stand behind, let's say a sense of nationalism. But then if you go higher above nationalism and, we're all earthlings, right, in terms of like trying to unify, at a global sort of stage, which is what the Olympics aspires to do. And they changed their motto and they added higher, faster, stronger. They added together as another aspect of the motto. Maybe, this also to me means togetherness. And that really is, I think, something of value with, a reason for me wanting to, join in and just kind of engage in that as well. It's an engagement and togetherness.
Yeah. I mean, thanks for sharing that, and we'll continue going forward. But in that analogy, yeah, I mean, this is intellectually understanding why the committee did what they did. And then there's several people, some of them will experience that, and some will go toward the original intent of Olympics. So that's what we are seeing in this Ramkali Rag's Sidh Ghost, where unknowable, how do you know the unknowable, right? And then how do you feel the elements of that, so you can become like the unknowable? That's our analogy going on here. Okay, so we do have Karandeep as well. Go ahead, Karandeep. What would you like to share? 1Oankar Nam, or the relationship between Shabad and Nam?
The relationship between Shabbat and Nam. I like the slide where it was a simpler slide where it said, Shabbat leads to Nam, leads to Ikankar. I guess my question is, in this whole process of trying to understand Ikankar, where does human limitation come? Like, are we only limited to experiencing Nam, or can humans experience further, go from Nam to Ikankar?
There is, the simple answer as I understand it, and it's unfolding for me as well. 1Oankar is infinite, right? So the elements of it we can experience. There is no limits, but we are not infinite ourselves. But we become like the infinite. We go towards the infinity as we become vast. So there is not a, so we have, it's the limited experiences that I am not, this whole phraseology which goes around in the religious traditions, am I God or am I an element of God? Well, this one is disrupting all of that. We don't know. You figure it out. The levels of forces you can relate with, invoke, understand, feel, experience, all the way to becoming like 1Oankar, because Gurbani says we can become like 1Oankar, where it very clearly says, even in beyond Sidh Gosti, Harjan Aisa Chahiye, Rasa Hari Ho, or within Sidh Gosti, where it says when you experience Nam, you become like the 1Oankar. So there might be self-limits. Again, I don't want to reduce this to mental understanding. That will be the Shabad element only. Shabad element says there are no limits. It's up to you how vast you want to become. And Nam is experiencing that vastness. Jasleen, what do you think? We need to start wrapping up towards our time is going, and we can open it up to journal Q&A after your comment.
Yeah, I think I'm with you on that. We're all kind of trying to understand this as we go, and it's unfolding in different ways for different people. So I would say we know that we all have the same potential within us. And I remember Harinder saying that we all have the same potential within us, and that includes like even the people we see as like the holiest people. And that always has stuck with me, because I think, again, we think certain people have certain potentialities and certain people don't. And I come back to like Asakivar a lot, talking about how we all have this potential at the very end of Asakivar, how we're all vessels, and it all is just about what we're bringing into ourselves and what we're pouring out. And so, yeah, if you take Shabbat at its word, which, that's what we're doing here, then yeah, we all have the potential to become 1Oankar. Like, I don't know what that would look like, but it's a potential that we all have. So.
All right. I think this is a good segue into journal Q&As. And before we do that, Jasleen, you have one more question for us to head into that area.
Yeah. So it's a set of 3 questions again. So we'll try to be quicker about it this time, but there's the 3 blue questions. Who do you think are the Siddhs today? Oh, somebody already started. Which elements of the Siddhs do you see among the 6? And which of those elements of the Siddhs are within you? So a little bit of reflection on our own Siddh-like behavior, maybe. And then we'll get into a larger discussion and larger Q&A. So somebody said, Siddhs for me today are the people who attain something and then actively escape the world and don't share their attainment with others. That's very interesting. Oh, we're naming names. Okay. Jeff Bezos, Sam Harris, the Siths. Okay. Interesting. Richard Dawkins. All right.
You guys are making Jasleen laugh. We are supposed to have fun with this question. That was the whole idea here. So it can be very disruptive, very funny, very controversial, and all of the above, because Siddhs are like that. They can be funny, they can be very sexual, they can be very corrupt, and they can be very supernatural, possessors, powers.
Isn't it all of us at a different time? Yeah. That's why we have that next question. So good one. Yeah.
All right. So we'll come back to discuss these, and we can, Jasleen, I'm looking at the interest of time. We actually have about 10 minutes to finish our session.
Okay.
Before there are program notes for last 5 minutes.
Got it. So feel free to keep adding things, but we'll move on to the next couple of slides. So which elements of the Siddhs do you see among Sikhs? And the next.
Whatever your understanding has become about what Siddhs are and what you are seeing in the larger Sikh community, those elements, you know. So who are the Siddhs among Sikhs? That's what this is. Who are you seeing them?
Us versus them. Succinct. Yeah.
So this is not the who question, which elements? So that's great. Yeah, we can stick to, and I think in the last one, somebody I think Gurpreet Singh had noticed which ones were who versus what questions. And you'll see that these are intentionally written like that as well. Because we want to focus on the elements.
Close-mindedness, meditation, looking down upon others. Holier than thou, so it's kind of similar. We'll put them next to each other. Passion to keep learning. Too sick. Ego. Okay, that's exclusivity. Using etymology to explain versus Shabad. Great.
We can go to the next set of questions while people are filling this, and we'll come back to discussion on this.
Okay. And then the last question is, which of those elements of the Siddh are within you? Ego again, yeah. So yeah, feel free to fill that out, and we'll get back to discussing it.
The differentiation in the last one is sometimes we are too harsh on our community. Let's be a little bit harsh on us now, because you might think it's only the Sikh problem. And if you say you are a self-identified Sikh, some of those are our problems, my problems.
Feeling of I need to wander to get to the Nam. Stubborn. I'm with you there.
Okay. Jasleen, if it's okay with you, as they're filling this, maybe we can just do a disruption of all three questions.
Yeah.
And we can have conversations with anyone who's interested in on all three elements.
Of course, yeah.
With it and be serious at the same time. You know, let's see if we can integrate the two things.
Yep.
All right.
So if people want to start raising their hands.
Yeah, anyone interested in observing what's going on here between these three sets of questions? Please raise your hand and we'll come to you. Okay. Jasleen, why don't you comment on the first question, and then it seems like we'll spend more time on the third one. So, all right.
Yeah. It's interesting because I think we've pointed to like Siddhs as spiritually elevated people in one, and then also are looking at like Jeff Bezos and Sam Harris. So it's interesting like how people understand Siddh as like something very, very general. I don't want to dwell too much on it, but yeah, those weren't the first people that I would probably think of. But I think the more general thing, instead of naming names, is this this like detachment as we understand it, and how, and I sort of hinted at this earlier, but like how our idea of what it means to be detached is very different from what the Siddh's idea is of how to be a detached person. And we use this phrase, we ought to be in the world, not of the world, so much, but it's this like ability to exist here and invest in this place, and then also not be moved and unsteadied by it. And I don't really know, how else to explain it. But I think that is a theme that I see here outside of, the Jeff Bezoses and the Siddhs.
And the other way to look at this is, before we move to the second one, is, Siddhs were who? I mean, look, they were about being very precise, very prescriptive about how to become there to reach their goal. Very, very prescriptive. This is it. This is how you do it. This is how you breathe. This is how you sit. This is how you understand what shunya or emptiness is. So very prescriptive angles, and nothing else matters because this is the only thing. So a lot of exclusivity, a lot of prescription. And if that is what you see in the people you are naming, which is fine. Now, the elements of which, this prescriptiveness, this we are the, and by the way, Guru Nanak Sahib in Japji Sahib, I'm sure most of you, or not all of you will recognize this line, where he says, I Panthi Sagal Jamati, Man Jeeta Jagjeet. That last part everyone knows. I Panth was the proven Siddhs, their highest order. And he completely disrupted. He says, you think you are the best order in the world. You know, somebody wrote Siddhs there, right? Things like that. He says, no, the whole world belongs to that order, which means, you know, we all have that access, which we have been discussing. So in this one, if I can quickly look at it, I think this is, elements of what we wrote into the previous question, we are seeing it here. You know, people being caught up in methodology versus, this holier than thou element and everything else about achieving the end goal in a particular way, but minusing this, the Rahao line, remember? The Shabad was invoked and Sach was invoked. The two S's we are interested in, Sabad and Sach. And if the infinite wisdom is not being invoked, we are becoming like a Sidh. And we have that element within us. If Sach, the eternal idea, the truth with a capital T is not being invoked, that a Sidh element has entered us. And every other running around in the absence of pursuit of those two makes us like Siddhs. So if we can go to the last one and get some hands up on that one, because this is where at the end of the day Sikhi is about, self-reflection and self-development. Who would like to share something on what's written or any other response? Going beyond mental gymnastics. All right, Karandeep, let's see if I can, go ahead.
So listening to, Sidh Gosti, you start to think there was a reason why they disconnected themselves from this world and went somewhere else to get easier access to whatever they were looking for. And in this day, being in the Western hemisphere, it's so hard to disconnect from everything. Is it just me, or is it getting harder and harder than it was before to be able to disconnect yourself from your family or from everything, your job, to find whatever you're looking for? Like, how do you become a Sidh while you still live in this kind of environment where it's getting harder every day?
So I'll flip it. I want to respond to it. I think it's getting easier and easier at the same time. Look at the accesses you have to Shabad. Look at the accesses you have to this idea of experiencing now, right? So it's harder. So connection to your phone is easy, but so is the disconnect. You just have to disconnect as well. So it is, we cannot go into the historical mode that it was easier 150 years ago, or it was easier 450 years ago. Yes and no. Every space has its own easiness and its hardness, and those will constantly change because they have to do with the physical domains and the accesses. But yes, the work is very much about bringing into our own lives. So it is very easy. At the same time, it's very hard because of the paradigm we are living. You can be fully connected through your gadgets and still be very detached. Or you could be fully connected through your gadget and become overly attached to manufacture things on your profiles and relationships, right? So both are happening at the same time. It's how you access and willfully, intentfully work towards making certain decisions for yourself. That's just one quick response. I just wanted to basically say, yes, it's harder, but yes, at the same time, it's easier as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the only thing I would add is that if we think of Nam as an active, creative thing in the world, then the way that we see the world changes, because it's not just that I have to lock myself in a basement room and close my eyes to feel something. It's that I can go out in the world and seek that same connection or that same inspiration. It's about sort of seeing the world a different way. I don't want to dwell too much on this, but we were talking about a Shabad the other day that we're working on for the Granth project. And there's a line that says it's what makes the world false is not some inherent thing about the world. It's not that the world is inherently false. It's the way that we've lived in the world for so many sort of generations. It's the ways that we have kind of moved away from what is our inherent sort of within our nature, which is to seek connection with 1Oankar through, Nam and Shabbat and these things that we've been discussing. It's not that the world is false and that we need to get away from it. It's that we need to figure out how to see the world and be in the world that is different from the kind of like lies and attachment that we amass. And that's just, it's part of being human, but we have to kind of actively come back to who we inherently are, if that makes sense. I hope that's not too like abstract.
Well, it's like you said, Jasleen, it's coming to terms with our own lives, right? My own personal lives. That's one way to come out of this cute and go towards such. Vineet, your hand is up.
Yeah, I think kind of the elements of Sidh that I was kind of mind blown about today is that, like the Sidhs, they existed in the negation of things, of what isn't real, of what we shouldn't do, of what is ego, and seeing that in the world. And I think what Guru Nanak adds to that kind of equation is what to refocus on. So instead of focusing on what isn't and what shouldn't be done, is that refocus of what we should do, which is coming back to that centricness. And as kind of the question earlier, that difficulty of it's so difficult to do is because we have to constantly yield this willpower to negate rather than, moving beyond that negation and saying, well, this is what I need to do. And I think our brain and our self it kind of gets on board much quicker when we know what to do rather than constantly focusing on what we shouldn't do.
Oh, thank you, Vineet. Appreciate that. This is one way to look at 1Oankar, that it does not start with a 0, starts with a 1. So 1 is an affirmation itself, right? And thank you for sharing that. Yes, we are very much a life affirming, sort of a faith tradition. Guys, the slide is up there. Jasleen and I have been talking about what 1Oankar Nam is. Essentially, you're seeing what 1Oankar is very active. It is the origin and the active force in the creation itself. So creator and creation are coming together in 1Oankar. And it is the source of every virtue which we talk about. And Nam is something which, the why part of the Nam is getting answered in this slide. It helps us to become free. It helps us to get rid of pride. I know we like to say that, I'm proud of you, but that's part of we just discovered this is part of the problem, including in the Siddhic element. And the Nam is very accessible. The way you know that the Guru has entered your life, the Shabad and wisdom has entered is when you're living now. And that becomes a very real connection, which makes you virtuous, makes me, or potentially makes all of us virtuous like the one 1Oankar itself. So this is where Shabad, Nam and 1Oankar, this was exploration of that as it was seen in the conversations, in the dialogue. And the last thing I'll say, and then Jasleen can end with Puran Singh quote again. Remember, the line was, Naam rate Sidh Gosti hoye. So you and I and Jasleen and the rest of us throughout these 5 days, we are aspirational wanting to be drenched in Naam. We maybe have felt a couple of droplets, but we will not be able to talk about what Sidh Gosti is, how to have this dialogue to connect. But we are very much aspiring towards it. And we ask all of you to really think about that line, that the ones who are drenched in Naam will know how to do Sidh Gosti.
Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted, I know a lot of Puran Singh, we like him, but I think we'd like to leave you all with this, and I'll just read it aloud. So concentration, as taught in yoga of the Hindus, is to us but a geometrical intellectual attempt. We are for cosmic concentration, born in and out of the nature surrounding us. We only flow and let life flow in its limpid stream through us. Beautiful talk is meaningless unless heaven is at one's back. So maybe sometimes when we're thinking about how we talk to each other or how we're engaging in dialogue, we can remind ourselves of that last line. With that, we'll have Anu give you all the lowdown for the rest of the week. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Fantastic. I hope you all enjoyed our discussion on 1Oankar and Nam. I know that there's plenty of things that came up today, and we will continue the discussion on Sidh Gosti with our two presenters, Satpreet Kaur and Singh. Aside from that, I wish you all a fabulous day. Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh.